Okay, hello everyone. Yes, I wanted to talk about scholarships today. I know they're of huge interest to Asian families, particularly the music, drama, and music, art, and academic scholarships. Let me just start the slideshow. So I'm specifically talking about 13 plus entry here. So obviously there are scholarships sometimes in the sixth form, but the majority are given for 13 plus. So I thought it most relevant to talk about 13 plus. How do I move this? So in general, we can speak of about 6 different types of scholarships: academic, art, music, design and technology, sports and drama. As I said, over the years, the ones that we've had most interest in are generally academic, art and music, just because that tends to be where our students are most talented. We'd have had a few drama scholarships over the years, and I think in total just 1 sports scholarship from a Chinese boy. So I'm going to just focus on the top 3 there. So what is a scholarship? Scholarship is not a bursary. So a bursary is basically a financial support for a family who needs financial support. And that could be a small amount to quite a large amount, even some schools covering full tuition. Whereas scholarships actually only offer about 5% off standard tuition. So typically they're not applied for with the mind of saving money. It's much more for the honor of having the scholarship and the recognition, of course, of a student's talent in a particular area. Scholarships are not trophies to show off for parents to show off to their friends. They're actually quite a long-term responsibility and commitment from the student to the school. So in return for the scholarship, the school actually expects quite a lot from the students who have gained them in terms of time commitment to the particular subject or responsibilities with regards to other students and their proactiveness in the department related to their scholarship. So I'll talk about music scholarships first. So what are schools looking for in a music scholar? Most importantly, I think passion for music. So obviously strong musicality, so a sense for music that goes far beyond a typical average kids. Normally the ability to play at least 2 instruments to a reasonable level. And that level tends to be that you're level grade 8 in ABRSM for one and sort of grade 5 in another. However, having said that, there's no requirement to have actually sat ABRSM tests or to be at a specific level. It's just a guideline of the ability that the student should have. And there should also be a strong understanding of music theory. Now, in return for that scholarship, what does the music department expect from the student? Quite a lot. So they expect them to participate in school orchestra, chamber orchestra, choir, to act as a role model to other musicians, to accompany other musicians who may not be as talented. And of course, they expect the student to study music all the way through till the 6th form, so potentially for A-levels, certainly through GCSE. So what does the audition entail? So the music scholarship typically involves an audition and an interview. And the audition element is first, the child will play 2 pieces that they've chosen, or a selection of pieces that they've chosen to show off different skills. And these pieces should be contrasting so that they're showing off different skills and different styles that the child can play, and really just showcasing as much of the child's talent as possible. Ideally, do not pick ABRSM pieces. They're very common, and music department heads will have listened to them many, many times. It also doesn't show any particular interest that the child has for a particular style of music or types of music, or indeed a composer that they might really like. So best not go on down the ABRSM piece. After they've played the pieces, they should expect questions about those pieces, such as what their tempo is, their time, key signatures. Also, how do they contrast those 2 pieces? Why were they chosen? And the context in which they were written by the composer. Also, I went to one music audition with a child, and he was asked to play the same piece again, but in a different mood. So he had quite a happy sort of high tempo piece, and they wanted to hear it in a more sad way. And it was basically testing out, does he actually have a sense for the music, and can he express mood through the music? Students will also be expected to do sight reading, so strong sight reading skills are a must, and they'll do some oral tests, with some schools even doing some short but challenging written papers, maybe about music theory and the likes. Typical questions for the interview would be why and when did you first start playing? Ideally, this is the answer isn't because mummy and daddy made me when I was 4. It's got to be something that, you know, the child shows his genuine interest and motivation for learning the instruments. Questions about practice, so how often you practice, how do you structure your practice, how do you practice more challenging pieces, and how do you practice pieces you don't even enjoy particularly? Because obviously not every piece is a child's favorite piece, but we do have to learn them to improve skills and to improve. What's your long-term ambitions and plans? You know, does the child expect to take music to a professional level, or are they seeing it just as a hobby within their life for the rest of their life potentially? How does playing make you feel? What concerts have you been to and watched? What did they play? Why did you go to them? And how did you enjoy them or not? And who's your favorite composer and why? They're very typical questions, but obviously music heads can go completely off piste and ask very challenging questions if they feel necessary or really want to challenge a child. A few points on the instruments. Typically, just being able to play the piano is not sufficient to win a music instrument scholarship, unless you have a really, really talented child, so exceptionally talented. And of course, then the main reason is that schools typically only look to have 2 concert pianists, but maybe looking at as many as 30 violinists. So when they're selecting students for the scholarships, they are considering where do they have gaps in their orchestra, where do they need, which places do they need filling, and what instruments do they need. One of my students who gained a music scholarship was actually asked as part of the scholarship to take up a 3rd instrument, which the music department was missing basically and needed to fill in the orchestra. I should make one more point about music scholarships and indeed art scholarships. A lot of schools only offer the art scholarship and music scholarship to students who are already holding a place. This is because they are obviously making sure that the students meet the requirements of the school academically before they look at other talents. So students may only be able to sit the scholarships if they've already got holding a place basically at the school in year 9. So art scholarships, again, they're looking for genuine passion for art, creativity, and a broad set of skills allowing for work in different mediums. In return, what does the school expect? They expect the child to study art all the way through GCSE, if not beyond, and they expect children to participate in exhibitions and competitions, and a huge amount of time commitment to spending their free time working on pieces in the art department. And of course, you would expect that anyway of an art scholar, because you would expect them to be interested enough to want to spend a large amount of their time in the art department. What does the interview entail? So the art scholarship typically has an interview, a practical piece of work where students are observed creating things, and a discussion and sort of chat around the portfolio that the child will bring in, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So students basically bring in a portfolio and they talk about pieces in the portfolio. So what was your inspiration for creating this piece? Why did you use a certain technique or medium when doing this piece? What might you do differently if you recreated the piece? What was the sort of the pathway that you took when creating this piece and the steps that you took when creating it? So students really need to be very capable about talking about work that they've done previously and about their motivation for creating it and the thoughts that they had behind creation of the work. The practical is typically a child is set an assignment so that the art teacher can observe the student actually creating their work in real time. And most art departments will ask for a still life as well as one other type of practical piece. So the children should be comfortable demonstrating their art and creating art in front of other people. And again, answering questions about why they did it in a certain way or why they took a certain process while creating the art. The interview, again, is not dissimilar to the music one. It's a lot about motivation and reason for learning art in the first place. So when and why did you start doing art? What inspires you most when you're creating pieces? Who is your favorite artist and why? And what have you done to reach your current standard of art? So what lessons have you taken? How regularly do you take lessons? And of course, where do you take lessons? Who is your tutor? What are your long-term ambitions in art is another one. So the portfolio is basically an opportunity for a child to showcase a huge breadth of skills, techniques, and styles. So it's very important that the portfolio doesn't just show one type of art over and over, because that only shows the child is capable of creating that one type of piece. So it's really important that kids pick from different styles and sort of inspirations, and again, include not just 2D work, but potentially 3D work, which you can include by taking photos of sculptures or pottery that you've done or ceramics. There's also nothing wrong in including mistakes or errors in the portfolio. It shows where the child is learning. The child can talk about them and explain, actually, how did I improve since then, and how do I not make that mistake again? All the work in the portfolio should be unique, inspired, and imaginative. Copies of other artists' work will really not impress anybody. It's not showing any imagination or creativity. And all it's doing is demonstrating the ability to copy something else, which doesn't make for a good art scholar, really. The other thing that children should bring along to their art practical and sort of interview is their sketchbook. It says a lot about the ideas that kids come up with. Also, it shows the beginnings of ideas that may have ultimately ended up in the portfolio. And again, it's another talking point that the child can walk the head of art through. Academic scholarships. So these, unlike the other two, can be often can be applied for even if you don't have a place at the school already. So if you're not holding an unconditional offer or a conditional offer from Eton, you can still apply for the King's Scholarship. And I know that sounds odd in that parents might wonder, how on earth can the child get in on a King's Scholarship but not through the normal route? And that may be something to do with being very academic. If a child is very academic in a normal channel, and when they go through the normal process of interviewing at places like Eton, they may be considered sort of two-dimensional and not having enough extracurricular activities because they're so involved in academics. And that may mean that the interviewer doesn't feel that they're suitable for the school. However, obviously that doesn't mean that they're not suitable for a scholarship, where having academic interest and being particularly focused on academics is, of course, not a shortcoming, and can gain them a place if they want. So what are schools expecting from academic scholars or looking for in scholars? They're looking for participation in academic competitions. They're looking for exceptional intelligence, so not just a good student, but a genuinely intellectually sort of capable and extraordinary academic ability sort of in a student. They're looking for passion for learning beyond the classroom. So these type of kids, particularly at the elite schools, are kids who enjoy learning outside the classroom and will often have their head buried in a book about a subject they're interested in. And in return, they expect the child to excel academically throughout their life at the school. And of course, there's no question that most of them do, because they are so exceptionally talented intellectually. They look for them to serve as a role model to less academic students, and maybe even to support other students in their learning. So again, there's some commitment expected from a scholar, and obviously a little bit of pressure in that they're supposed to excel academically throughout their school life over the 5 years that they'll be at senior school. So the nature of the test, it varies greatly from school to school, but I've picked 3 of the more academic schools to demonstrate the differences. So Eton's King Scholarship requires 4 compulsory papers: English, Maths A, a Science and General Paper 1. And then students can pick 3 optional papers from Geography and Divinity, French, Latin, Greek, Maths B, a general paper, a tripartite paper with questions on history, geography and divinity. And Winchester, very similar actually, 4 compulsory papers: English, Maths 1, Science and General Paper 1. At least 3 optional papers from Latin, French, Greek, history, geography, Maths 2 and General Paper 2. And Wickham Abbey actually expects quite a lot compulsory papers: English, Maths, Science, history, geography, religious studies, and a modern language, with optional papers in Latin and Greek if the child has obviously taken them at school. That would be most relevant to students who are studying at prep schools in the UK. What to expect in exams. Now, I've just picked some questions from a selection of schools from their general papers. And I think as I read them out, you'll be surprised by the standard of difficulty and sort of how deep they go when they're really sort of targeted at 12 and 13-year-olds only. I think indeed most parents and most adults would find these quite challenging to consider and write a piece on. So an example is it wrong to believe anything unless there is sufficient evidence? Discuss. How and why might the happiness of a society be measured? Discuss the political problems likely to emerge from advances in digital technologies. Will machines eventually replace teachers? Would this be a good thing? Are some cultures more advanced than others? The impact of social media upon individuals and society has been profoundly negative. Discuss. Schools should focus more on STEM subjects than arts and humanities. Discuss. They're really thought-provoking, very open-ended, and they can go in various different directions. And given that these tests are obviously time restricted, it's asking a lot for a child to contemplate this and then write out a well thought through answer. So it's a real challenge for a normal 12 or 13-year-old wouldn't be able to do it. But for the children who are suitable for academic scholarships, they really enjoy these sort of intellectual discussions and types of questions. So this is geography, and I thought this is probably more sixth form level than year 9 level, but again, it's directed at 12 and 13-year-olds. Rivers, mountains, cracks in the ground, and many other natural phenomena appear similar at different scales. Why might this be? In geographical investigation, what is more useful? Data that covers a large spatial area or data that covers a large span of time? Compare and contrast colonialism with globalization. What influences the impact of hazard the most? Poverty, building quality, or chance? Interpret. The mountains flowed down at the presence of the Lord. The last question in particular it's a really challenging question. Even for me, I find it difficult to see how a biblical phrase can be sort of relevant to geography and how a child would handle that. Here's a maths paper. I won't go through and read it all, but I'll give you some time to look at it. Obviously giving a diagram and giving them basic information and then asking some quite challenging questions to solve it. Indeed, the child may not have actually studied this at school. So they're asking children to apply knowledge that they have gained either through their supercurricular activities or just concepts that they have in their brain, and challenging them with a really difficult question where they have to really stretch their mind to answer it. So this is King's Scholarship. Again, you can see how difficult it is. The King's Scholarship only awards 14 places every year. So it really is for the intellectually exceptional. Here's a King's Scholarship science question. So it's giving samples of various metals in test tubes, and they're adding hydrochloric acid of a certain concentration. And then the diagram is showing the different reactivity of the metals by showing bubbles and different, bubbles basically, which is the reaction it's having to the metals. And no bubbles were seen in copper and silver. And then it's asking other questions about about the reactions, writing equations about what might be happening, adding different types of acids to the test tubes, and explaining why certain reactions are taking place and others aren't. Really quite challenging for the young boy. This one is actually not an art scholarship paper. It's a general paper from Winchester election. So this is giving Pablo Picasso painted self-portraits of himself over the years and asking what you think the artist might try to show in a self-portrait and why you might try to show about yourself in a self-portrait. So it's a really sort of challenging question. It's not something that many children would contemplate, I don't think. But I must say this type of question is becoming more and more popular, even in standard interviews now at schools like Wellington and Radley and all different places where schools are giving children an image and asking them to contemplate what it means or what the meaning is behind it or why the artist did it or what the motivation for the artist was. They're really challenging types of questions, and really when you put a child on the just ask them off the top of their heads what they're thinking and don't give them much room to consider. It's quite challenging, and it tells you a lot about the child in where their thinking goes, which is why they're so popular. So what is the preparation? So it's different for different students in terms of where they are in which school. At a prep school, it's very easy to prepare. Prep schools basically at year 7 will put students into a scholarship form if they believe that they're suitable for a scholarship, or if they just believe that they need to study beyond the curriculum beyond common entrance because they need stretching. So they may not believe that a student genuinely has the ability to get a scholarship, but they believe that the student needs stretching beyond the common entrance curriculum. So they put them in a class and then they basically prepare that class for scholarships and in the different schools that they're selecting for scholarship level. Now, of course, if they're looking at the likes of Winchester, Eton, Wickham Abbey, the really academic schools, the content of those scholarships and the difficulty level will be quite similar. So they can study together and they'll hold discussions on various things like the thought-provoking questions I saw, so that they can sort of see where children's mind go and their children can feed off each other and learn from each other. But they also do a lot of training on past papers. The good thing is past papers are readily available for most schools which have scholarships. Either they're on the school website like Eton, or you can just ask the school like Wickham Abbey for some sample papers from previous years. And they really are good training. And indeed, you do see a lot of commonality in the English papers, for example. Both Winchester and Wickham Abbey like to do quite challenging sixth form level poems. But using either paper from either school will still help train the student and improve their skills. So year 8 in a prep school is spent drilling on those papers and really practicing over and over again, so that when the student takes the test, they're not alarmed at the difficulty and they have a sense for what to expect and how to answer the questions to the best of their ability. So constant practice is the best training, really. Now, kids in Hong Kong, I expect, and China do a lot of extra school tutoring to actually work beyond their own school curriculum, because the school won't necessarily cover the content of the tests. In fact, they probably don't. And of course, they also train on past papers, as most schools, again, happily provide samples. So it's a lot of work. It's not something that students should do half-heartedly. If you're going to apply for a scholarship, you need to invest a lot of time in preparing for it. But again, I think students who are intellectually capable enough really enjoy the preparation and find it quite challenging and quite fun to stretch their minds in this way. And that's exactly what the type of student should be who is suitable for a scholarship. A few notes on scholarships. Most applicants for academic scholarships will not get a scholarship. However, if you're holding an offer from a school already and you perform well enough in the scholarship exams, then the offer often will become unconditional and the school will waive the requirement of sitting common entrance. So as I said, some schools will actually suggest the student sits a scholarship to stretch them academically, but also so that they don't have to sit common entrance later down the road. Instead, they take the scholarship, perform well enough, hopefully, and then they can get their firm offer from the school of choice, even though they didn't win the scholarship. Some schools invite students who have sat normal entrance exams to sit scholarship exams. So this is based on the outcome of their entrance exams. They select very capable students who performed exceptionally well on their 13+ papers and invite them to sit the exams at the school. So that's something that Wickham Abbey does, for example. I'd say there's very little point pushing a student who is not capable of managing the rigorous and abnormally difficult level of a scholarship exam to sit a scholarship. It's much better to focus them on securing a place through the normal route. There is no need to push your child to do a scholarship if they're not good enough. There's nothing wrong with getting into Eton the normal way. You know, most 95+% of the kids are actually going through the normal route and taking common entrance. So if your child isn't capable of scholarship, but is capable of gaining a place at somewhere like Eton or Winchester, feel proud of them anyway, I think is my point. If your child is in a prep school in the UK, typically the headmaster can advise you on whether or not your child is actually scholarship potential. And that goes with all scholarships. You know, they'll be able to see if they're suitable for art and music as well as academic. And I'd like to make one more point, which is a little sort of tip. If students are on waiting lists at certain schools and really want to demonstrate you know, that they're very capable academically and want to send a message to the school that they're really working hard, that they've improved a lot maybe since they took their pre-test a couple of years back, then sitting a scholarship and performing well can often be a great way to get the head of admissions to notice you on the waiting list and potentially consider moving you off if a place becomes available. So a small tip there for kids who are sitting on the wait list, but obviously only do it if you're comfortable knowing that your child can perform well on the academic scholarship. That's all I have to sort of share with you today. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions.